Let's talk about Yuri. If you don't watch manga or anime, you may be asking, Meeka, what is Yuri? Well, if you didn't get the hint from that clip I just rolled, I'll give you a definition. According to Wikipedia, it's a genre of Japanese media focusing on intimate relationships between female characters. But I think this definition lacks the soul of what Yuri truly is. Let me paint a picture for you. It's 8 a.m. on the first day of school and you enter a classroom. You've been assigned to sit in the back next to a gloomy-looking girl with long, dark hair that is longingly looking outside of the window. Throughout the school year, the two of you grow close. Despite your opposite personalities, you share a mutual feeling of social alienation from the world around you. For the first time, you feel heard, you feel seen, but by some evil force like boys' society or a doomed fate, your relationship is doomed to fail. These kinds of stories have been popular among girls since the 1920s because of their emotional intensity and deeply romantic dynamics. It's a kind of love that can't explicitly be said. Love between girls is forbidden, so it makes the genre all the more exciting. Could this be why the stories almost always end in tragedy? Could it be due to this social stigma, or could it be deeper? In this video, we will look at the historical roots of doomed Yuri, aka love between girls that is destined to fail. Media influences society, and society influences media. And as silly as it sounds, analyzing Yuri can tell us a lot about the perception of lesbianism in Japan in the past 100 years. In this video, I argue that doomed Yuri emerged as a byproduct of Japan's nation-building and modernization process. The explosion of newspapers and mass media sensationalized tragic stories of lesbian love, while magazines created fictionalized narratives that, to an extent, romanticized queer oppression. Both journalistic and fictional accounts of same-sex love promoted the conservative values of the Japanese Empire, laying the foundation for tropes that still exist in the modern Yuri genre. Before we get into this video, I would like to thank my lovely patrons for making this video possible. If you would like to support me further, you can go to patreon.com/meekalafe, or if that's not in your means, you can just click the subscribe button, but don't forget to hit the notification bell because a lot of you guys have not been receiving notifications for my video recently, which is weird. And yeah, let's get started. What makes a cherry blossom tree so beautiful? Its color, shape, abundance. Perhaps it's the ephemerality of these flowers. They only bloom for a week or two. It's a beauty that's fleeting. As the petals fall into the soil, making room for the fruits and leaves that are to come, we become more conscious of its presence. Its value is elevated. In Japanese aesthetics, mono no aware calls for us to see the beauty in impermanence. Seasons are beautiful because they change, and life is beautiful because it ends. That's part of the reason why hanami, or flower viewing festivals, are very popular in Japan. This philosophy highly influences Japanese storytelling, including romance. The tale of Genji is probably one of the most famous examples of this concept in Japanese literary tradition. Written in the early 11th century, the story follows Hikaru Genji, the son of an emperor and notorious womanizer. Over the course of his life, he copes with the loss of his loved ones, each death having a profound mark on his soul. Despite Genji's deeply flawed character, it's hard not to empathize with his feelings of longing and melancholia. The fleeting beauty of these brief romances is what drives part of the story. Similarly, in Yuri manga, love is almost always ephemeral. They're usually not permanent relationships, but a fleeting moment in a girl's life in which they're allowed to experience queer love. That is before they enter the adult world, are forced into marriage, or meet some other tragic fate. This trend can be interpreted through the lens of Mono no Aware, and many historians tend to do so. But I do think there is more to this concept than just ancient Japanese aesthetics. Unlike straight romances, these tales are ephemeral from the start. For Genji, the possibility of lasting romance was always there because love between man and a woman was the standard. But love between women is not.
You're both girls! Girls can't love girls! Girls can't love girls! Girls can't love...
Heteronormativity plays a huge role in how ephemeral love is depicted in queer versus straight romances. And you see this all throughout the world. While the tale of Genji was written in the 11th century, the Yuri genre only began to take shape some 900 years later, in the 1910s and 20s. During those centuries, Japanese society changed immensely. Even though old aesthetic concepts continued to influence Japanese literature, modernization also brought about new ideas regarding society. Nation building required the state to create an ideal citizen, an in-group to contrast with an out-group. Gender, race, and class all played important roles in the formation of a national identity that was regurgitated in mass media. Thus, modern depictions of same-sex love between women cannot be understood without understanding modernization itself. For centuries, the Tokugawa shogunate government isolated Japan from most of the world. But this all changed in 1868. The military government was dismantled and replaced with the emperor system. The new government embarked on a quest to modernize and industrialize the nation. Within just a few decades, factories and railroads replaced farms and dirt roads. What was once a feudal agricultural society eventually became an empire with one of the strongest navies in the world. As a part of modernization, Japan began to allow the circulation of foreign ideas into the country, which spread rapidly due to faster printing technologies. The combination of industrialization and globalization reorganized society, and people began to ask questions like, what does it mean to be a worker? What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be Japanese? Movements dealing with economics, race, politics, and gender sprung up to deal with the new issues that were ushered in by capitalism. Women began to organize. They wrote political theory, marched, and created spaces for a feminist community. In 1885, the first woman's magazine was published in Japan. In 1919, the new Women's Association was formed to address voting rights, education, and employment. A new kind of girl emerged, a modern girl, one who challenged conservative views of fashion, sexuality, and morality. Things were changing, and Japanese women felt like progress was being made. However, the state had a different vision of modernity. They chastised this new culture, calling modern girls promiscuous and un-Japanese. To the state, good women were wives and mothers who sought to create a future for the nation. Foucault explains this phenomenon perfectly. He states, quote, "A policing of sex, that is, not the rigor of taboo, but the necessity of regulating sex through useful and public discourses. Governments perceived that they were not dealing simply with subjects or even with a people, but with a population." I know this is a mouthful of a quote, and Foucault is a pain to read. So in other words, governments control their people by regulating the health of its population. With this logic, women were reduced to being baby-making machines because it would ensure that the nation had a robust population. Women were expected to nurture the minds and bodies of future Japanese men, only for these men to be used as cannon fodder in the state's imperialist wars. According to Akiko Onyoda, this pro-natalist agenda was part of a larger effort to make Japan a, quote, civilized country equal to the West. But how are they supposed to get this mission across such a vast population? What Japan did was honestly very slimy. The state weaponized feminist calls for equal educational opportunities by opening all girls' schools throughout the country. But these schools didn't provide girls with knowledge that would empower them. Instead, they were taught how to be good wives and wise mothers, to churn out Japanese women that would neatly fit into the state's pro-natalist agenda. However, this handmaiden-esque system ended up creating a whole new and queerer problem. While the segregated nature of these schools was intended to cement the division between the sexes, these schools became a space where girls could challenge their subordination and create a collective shared culture and identity. Along with being taught how to serve the nation, schoolgirls were encouraged to develop deep emotional and even spiritual bonds with one another for the purpose of creating a collective national gender identity and keeping them away from men. Sometimes even physical love between girls was permitted in order to contain the unruly desires of girls. You see, since physical intimacy only counted when it was between a man and a woman, a male and a female, they weren't technically doing anything wrong. They were still pure by the standard that society created for them, in order for them to secure a good marriage. In other words, love between girls was permitted because their purity was not being defiled by a man. This was a loophole in the system that actually produced a vibrant queer culture. Students entered esukanke, which were emotionally intense and spiritual relationships between classmates. It was actually a rite of passage for many girls to experience esukanke. They simply saw it as a phase that girls would go through and would inevitably pass. These relationships were frequently written about in girls' magazines during the Taisho period, and even became its own dedicated genre called Class S fiction, S referring to esukanke. Fictional short stories that depicted esukanke were super popular because of their dreamy and romantic prose. Characters would pine for each other, have bouts of jealousy, and follow other tropes that were typical of the romance genre. However, these relationships never lasted because when they reached adulthood, girls were married off. Also, it's important to note that these girls were usually depicted as being feminine presenting and did not really defy any gender rules with their physical expression. Yoshiya Nobuko, a lesbian herself, was a pioneer in this genre, and many consider her works to be early forms of Yuri. In 1916, she published a collection of short stories titled Flower Tales in the magazine Shoujo Gaho. These stories depicted love between schoolgirls, young teachers, and student council members, but they never culminated in any physical expression of love. According to Michiko Suzuki, quote, although Yoshiya emphasizes the positive nature of this love, in Flower Tales she links such romance with illness and tragedy. Love is often unrequited, or even when it is reciprocated, the relationship is terminated due to a change of heart, separation, disease, or death. The girls in Flower Tales are extremely melancholy, overwhelmed with tears. They're nostalgic, not only for the past, but also already for their own girlhood that would inevitably come to an end. They are in a continuous state of mourning for the same-sex world. In 1920, Yoshiya began to write more challenging queer literature that appealed to more of an adult audience. In 1925, she started her own magazine titled Black Rose to escape the conservative publishing industry. She wrote stories in which her characters were established lesbians, not just schoolgirls going through a phase. In these stories, women openly express physical affection, kissing and cuddling one another. Yoshiya discussed themes of identity and sexuality as permanent and gave these women happily ever afters. However, these works were not written for girls' magazines. Thus, they were not part of the Yuri genre, and girls' culture continued to be tainted by this heteronormative influence. The Yuri genre continued to stray away from discussing the sexual identity of their characters. These girls never mentioned having a lesbian, bisexual, or queer identity, because in doing so, they would legitimize sapphic or same-sex love as permanent. This would destabilize the gender roles created by the nation-state. After all, how were two women supposed to produce future Japanese children? It's time to put on the old hat for this next segment. The capitalist mode of production relies on the nuclear family to maintain a steady underclass of laborers that generate profit. You see, women are not designated as domestic laborers because they are inherently good at maintaining the household. Instead, their labor is quote-unquote naturalized because it gives the ruling class an excuse not to pay them for their arduous labor. By naturalized, I mean assigning an essential role to women by justifying their labor as intrinsic and biological. Okay, hat off. But by creating this idea of women as childbearers, the state can get women to birth and raise children against their will. But lesbianism discounted this gender division of labor by proving that relationships did not need to be centered on men, and that not all women have to bear children. Thus, esu-kankei relationships were created in order to control deviant forms of sexuality, not promote them. This genre was meant to promote the idea that queer identity was impermanent and fleeting. That same-sex love between women was a brief experience of girlhood before entering the adult world through marriage. According to Fanaska, quote, different from homosexuality, which was seen as a deviated and pathological condition, S relationships represented a stage of a schoolgirl's emotional development. They were seen as inherently platonic and hence generally accepted by the society, given that they were supposed to only last during the high school years. These stories usually ended with one of the girls entering a marriage, being forced apart, and even dying from illness. These tragic outcomes were mirrored in the experiences of lesbians who enter the adult world in real life. Girls who embraced same-sex attraction in their youth were suddenly forced to renounce this part of themselves in adulthood, which was a loss akin to mourning a deceased loved one. But for queer women in Japan, death was not just metaphorical. Oftentimes, it was the only reality they knew of. In 1911, two upper-class women from Niigata Prefecture ended their lives together because society would not accept them as a couple. This event brought same-sex love between women to public attention, albeit through media sensationalism and a perverted fascination with the intimate details of their relationship. Doctors and politicians eventually monopolized this discourse, creating categories and labels to maintain power over this marginalized group. You see, outside of the girls' school institution, Japan heavily restricted the freedom of women who went against the grain. Anyone that was not a good wife and wise mother was seen as inferior and undesirable. The state adopted a medicalized vision of sexuality and gender that echoed Western eugenicist ideas. This was a view that sought to strengthen the nation's people by weeding out quote-unquote undesirables. A moral panic emerged about what were deemed ome relationships, lesbian couplings in which one partner would dress in a stereotypically masculine fashion. The state scapegoated these women to explain the issues that arose out of Japan's capitalist transformation. Newspapers and magazines vilified ome, portraying them as morally depraved women that threatened the social order. They were cast in sharp contrast to dosei women, the fleeting femme-femme couples in the girls' magazines that we discussed earlier. These romances were legitimized because they were impermanent and safe, since both partners presented femininely. Thus, dosei was created as an in-group, accepted for the purpose of containment, and ome were created as an out-group. So what we can see here is that lesbianism was not wholeheartedly banned, but was mitigated through a divide and conquer strategy that prevented the development of a united queer identity. Medicalization was one of the key ways that cemented this social hierarchy. According to Foucault, medicalization is the process by which social phenomenons are treated as medical issues. In the Western world, homosexuality was treated as a psychiatric disorder, a disease that needed to be contained, and this was up until very recently. And this Western discourse of medicine eventually spread to the Japanese Empire, which benefited from this mechanism of population control. The public had a sudden interest in sexology, or the medical study of sexuality. Japanese sexologists claimed that there were two types of lesbianism: shin, which was real, permanent, and Western, and kari, which was provincial, temporary, and Japanese. This medicalized framework was used to reassure parents that their lesbian children would eventually lose their attraction to women and marry men. It was a phase that would pass like any other disease. The fleeting and temporary nature of lesbian love led to the emergence of doomed Yuri as a subgenre. According to Fanaska, early Yuri publications pushed the narrative that, quote, a purely lesbian love, unrespectful of the heterosexual order, is presented as impossible and ultimately wrong, leading only to a life of sorrow. For lesbians, entering the adult world was tragic. It meant rejecting any possibility of romance. The state's oppression led to even more lesbian double in the imperial period. Instead of addressing the social roots of this occurrence and mourning for the people that died, the media used this as an opportunity to ridicule and harass these women. In 1935, Masuda Yasuma and Saijo Eriko attempted a double but were unsuccessful. Since these were bourgeois women, they received substantial and inflammatory media attention. They received this attention from popular magazines with a particular focus on ridiculing the masculine appearance of Yasuma. The magazine columns were usually written by sexologists who, as we discussed earlier, imposed a medicalized gaze upon their subjects, a tradition that was adopted from Western theories of medicine. Thus, a cycle emerges. Yuri writers publish queer works, inspiring young girls to embrace their sexuality and enter lesbian relationships as adults. These women end up facing backlash and oppression from the state, which occasionally culminates in a double that is sensationalized by the press, reinforcing the idea that same-sex love is ephemeral and can only be written as such. Yuri became an established subgenre of manga in 2003, with the release of the manga Yuri Shimai. While modern Yuri is used to describe manga, not literature, its narratives and themes are undoubtedly influenced by the Class S genre and the persecution of lesbianism in the imperial period. But I do think it would be simplistic to state that doomed Yuri is a completely problematic genre. As we discussed earlier, ephemeral love is a prevalent theme in Japanese literature, and sometimes reading these sad stories can provide readers with an odd sense of comfort. In queer circles, doomed Yuri is appealing because it shows a bond that transcends mortality. According to one Reddit user, quote, it's specifically the undoubtedness of this connection that gets me. Now that's romance. Much progress has been made regarding LGBTQ rights in Japan since the imperial era, and many modern Yuri manga have happy endings. It's not my intention to police Yuri readers on their choice of manga, and I understand the appeal of tragic love stories. However, we must remember the real women who lost their lives because of their openness about their sexuality or deviant gender norms, and it's important to consider how media sensationalism, the medical gaze, and empire perpetrated the idea that girls' love was ultimately ephemeral. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I think this is a topic that not many people talk about because it's not really taken seriously academically, because people hear the word Yuri and they laugh and it's anime, why are you analyzing anime? But I want to thank my Japanese studies professor for teaching me so much about Japanese media and how media affects the real world and history. And as always, thank you to my amazing, perfect, lovely patrons. If you would like to support me further, my Patreon is patreon.com/MeekaLaFay. And I now have a Discord server open, so you guys can join and chat if you guys are patrons. Yeah, I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day. Bye bye, guys.